Hi guys, welcome back for your second lesson in geography, and we're looking at glacial processes in this lesson, but we'll recap from lesson one of glaciation, looking at the glacial system, and with a few short questions. I'll put them up on the screen. If you can answer those and put them up in a Google Doc or a photo of your work from today as recap questions. There's 6 there. What are some glacial inputs? What are some glacial outputs? What are some glacial processes? What happens if there are more inputs than outputs to the glacier? What is the glacial budget or mass balance? What is glacial accumulation? And what is ablation? Okay, so 7 little questions, and you can try and submit those on Google Classroom. And once you finish the rest of your work, either as a photo of your work or as a Google Doc. So learning intentions today to understand how glacial processes shape our land. And there's 2 main processes in glaciation: features of erosion and 1 main process of weathering, and you should be able to explain those by the end of today. You will be familiar with some of them. So what processes can you remember from National 5? Have a think, maybe jot a few down, and you can unpause the video and then listen to me for a little bit. So having had a look or think about your processes, you probably covered things from the limestone topic of weathering, where you have biological, chemical and physical weathering. And then you might have thought about process of erosion we've covered this year already in the coast topic or in hydrosphere, to do with rivers like hydraulic action, abrasion, solution. And the one that's the most relevant for this topic is abrasion, because we'll look at that along with a new one called plucking, which is unique to glaciers. And we'll also look at free-thaw weathering again, which we've already covered as a wee recap. So this feature here is a corrie with a corrie lochen, and it's one of the features you'll learn about explaining its formation in the next lesson. It's a keystone feature, meaning that you can explain 2 other features very easily. And if you remember back to your formation of a spit lesson, if you had a spit, you could explain a tombolo or a sandbar with 1 extra sentence. It's the same idea. And you can do that with a corrie and looking at an arête and a pyramidal peak with an extra sentence for those 2 if you were to be asked about them. Something you should note down is what weathering is and what erosion is. There is a big fundamental difference, and I want you to be aware of that. So there's a sentence there on the screen about weathering being the process of weakening and breaking rocks up. It says there, it can be physical, chemical, also it can be biological with roots getting into cracks and forcing them apart. And then erosion being just the wearing away of land by the water, wind, or ice. There's a bit more reading if you want to widen your knowledge of that, and you can go and have a look at that web's link there. It'll tell you a bit about it. So just a little idea, note down of what weathering and erosion is, nothing else from that slide. 2 process of erosion you'll have to know about, and rather like coasts and when you looked at river features in the hydrosphere unit, you need to know how these processes work, where they work within the formation of the feature, so an arrow pointing to where they work, and how they change the feature shape. And quite often with glaciation, they're deepening or they're widening the valley, and that's what we can maybe kind of talking about, or the feature we're looking at. So get yourself a little definition for each of these. The key idea, as I said to you about your learning, is put little images to help you think. Little images like that have much more power for your learning and your skill of learning. Linking an idea to a simple picture means you're more likely to remember it. So plucking, girls or boys indeed, if you pluck your eyebrows, it's the same idea, but the glacier freezes onto the rock, and as if you've taken ice cubes out of the freezer with wet hands, you might have had the ice stick to your hands. It's that idea. So pulling the loose rocks away as the glacier continues to move downhill. And abrasion, also known as corrasion in the rivers unit, just abrasion here, is when the angular rocks, embedded in the glacier, grind the bedrock down, acting like sandpaper. And I've got a picture of a pestle and mortar there. It's that grinding action. And like a sandpaper. So if you see the diagram in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you can see these rounded rocks inside the glacier. I don't know why they're rounded in that diagram. It's probably more reflective that they're angular, they're sharp and jagged. And those being dragged along as they're inside the glacier scratch and wear away the surface. And that's that action of abrasion. And the plucking is when the glacier is sticking to the rock and moving away. You can see the diagram on the left. And we'll look at where these happen but just understanding what they are is one of the key parts of today's learning. And you can pick up to 4 marks for detailed explanations of processes in features of erosion of glaciation. So it's worthwhile understanding these because they can apply to all of the features of erosion we'll look at. Okay. So our next slide here, you've got a couple of pictures, nothing you need to copy here, it's kind of additional information, but it's all quite relevant. If we have a look here, you can see later a man, scientist standing in a kind of gap, and it's clear that this rock has been plucked out of situ where it was previously, where the person's standing, as the glacier is stuck onto it and pull it out. And you can see the actual rock colour is quite kind of pink or grey. It's kind of a granite, I would imagine, quite a hard rock. And the glacier may well just been above the person's head. You can see the different colour in the rock, and it's probably because this rock's been polished and smooth as the glacial abrasion, the sandpapering of the rocks kind of happened as the glacial ice has rubbed against it. And this picture on the left shows a glacier up against the side of a valley, and this was the kind of situation you'd have with this ice sticking on here, the block sticking on here, and this constantly dragging, moving against the edge of this valley feature there. And there's a few bits of extra information on the slide here. You can just have a little read of that, just the idea about friction and water freezing and how it works with that plucking action. Again, another little bit of extra information. The rock is, as I said, scratched, polished and smoothed as it's worn away by the grinding sandpaper action of abrasion. Okay, and those pieces of rock become smaller through this rubbing as well inside the glacier. Striations, you can actually see these on the map. There's bands within the rock, and that's just when the rock's formed. But in actual fact, the striations are these big gouges which run up and down the same direction of this geological hammer. And that's just where a piece of rock has been dragged across the surface of this glacier. And they're really useful for glaciologists to help understand the direction that glaciers flowed in places where they no longer exist. So you can go around Scotland and you can work out former heights of glaciers and directions they flowed. It's really quite cool. Okay, some more striations there. Were you listening? Which process is which? So just have a little think to yourself. A and B, which is abrasion, and which is plucking. You can pause and then unpause your shot there. You can see the glacier moving. You can see this word terminus. The other word we looked for that in the first lesson was the snout of the glacier. And we're getting a bit more melting going on the bottom right-hand corner, and the zone of accumulation is the top kind of half, and with the equilibrium line roughly in the middle. A, if you're wondering, should appear, hopefully. Yeah, abrasion and plucking. So abrasion being that rubbing of the rocks on the bedrock, or rocks within the glacier on the bedrock as it moves downhill, and glacial ice moving downhill and sticking to the rocks and pulling them out on the left there. So this is a feature of glaciation. This is this corrie we saw at the beginning. You've got a zone of plucking and a zone of abrasion, and it's where they're not exclusive to those places, but it's where you find most of that type of erosion tending to take place. So the glacier is sticking to the back wall, and as it moves downhill, it pulls bits of rock down into the base or the bowl shape, I guess, if you like. And as it moves up, we get this rotational sliding because it rotates up. And then we get more abrasion happening as the glacier is rubbing really hard, a lot of pressure with this weight of this thick ice. And then eventually we get material dropped off in the terminal moraine at the snout of the glacier. And that's one of the features of a deposition we will be looking at later. And it shows you where those processes act. So there's no need to copy anything down from that slide just now. There's a task here. So this is freeze-thaw weathering. It's a recap. You have looked at this process once already this year, but I still want you to do this as a task and submit it to me. So I want you to take a copy of those diagrams, first of all, and then I want you to rearrange the statements above, which are labeled A to E here, into the correct order because they're jumbled up just now. So have a go at that. The next slide does have the answer, but I want you to try and work this out for yourself, thinking task, and then you can submit to me your piece of work. So you can unpause whenever you're ready, and I'll carry on. So I've got a few bits I've added to the diagram. So remember that the key sort of fact is when water freezes by 9%. So you can make sure you add that to your diagram. I haven't done that there. And scree at the bottom of cliffs, or even sometimes brought into the glacier from above, is just rock fragments broken up by this freeze-thaw action. So the correct order was C, was number 1. Water collects in cracks and crevices in the rock above the glacier. Okay, like this. It could be what we call joints. Remember, they're vertical lines, or bedding planes are horizontal ones. And it doesn't just have to be above. It could be into the side of the cliff as well. And at night time, the temperatures drop below freezing and the water changes into ice. That water, actually, if you want a specific fact to develop your answer a bit further, is that it expands by 9%. So if anyone's chucked a bottle of fizzy pop, bottle of ginger, as they say in Glasgow, into the freezer before, then you'll tend to find that it will burst because it expands by the water expands in it by 9%, and it exerts pressure on the sides of the crack. Number 4, eventually the rock shatters, and this process repeats. In actual fact, for a bit of extra knowledge, we call this, it's a daily cycle quite often in the mountains, where the temperature just gets above freezing. It gets above freezing, above zero during the day when it's a bit warmer, and then at night time it's below freezing. So it's constantly repeating. So because it's a day and night cycle, often they call it diurnal. It's a really fancy word for you. But this is just a repeating process, is all you need to remember. And number 5, a sharp angular piece of rock are formed, and those are called scree. So that gives you a really good understanding of how frost shattering happens, and actually how a scree slope can start to form too. So collecting marks in the exam. For freeze-thaw alone, you do not need the diagrams. I have had pupils try to draw those for me before in Glacial questions. You don't need them. I can underline that again. The only point of doing that is to help with your understanding. That's why I get you to do that task. And also, it is not a process of erosion. It's a weathering process. Remember, it doesn't involve the movement, and it's not about the rubbing away or wearing away of things. It's about breaking them down and available for transport. So it's also called, it should also be noted, it's called freeze-thaw weathering or frost shattering. So if you see me referring to frost shattering, which I have here, it's when water in cracks turns to ice when temperatures drop below freezing. Continuous cycle of expansion, brackets 9%, and that's the extra bit you don't actually need. And contraction weakens the rock until fragments break off. That's going to get you a mark in the exam, possibly 2 marks if it's detailed enough and it's pointed to how it works, where it works, and how it contributes to the formation of a glacial feature. So that's the kind of wording or specific wording I would use beyond your initial learning. And there's a picture of a scree slope and people scree running there. And I've actually put a little video for you in of someone scree running in I think it's Wendell Scree Run Fail, apparently. So it's just a little giggle for you, worth a watch. Right, freeze-thaw weathering. Learn the 2 clips to consolidate, or watch the 2 clips, sorry, don't need to learn them, to consolidate your learning and processes. You don't need to take any notes here. There's a couple of links. One of them doesn't appear to have worked as a hyperlink in the slides there, so maybe I need to go back and edit that. But I'm sure you can copy-paste that into your browser and have a little look to help develop your understanding of weathering processes. And the BBC one's quite fun. And the other one underneath is quite useful as well. So a little bit of recap for you. Again, you can do these little recap questions in your Google Doc or on your notes and submit those to me as well. And I'll go over the answers at the end, so you can pause and just double check your work. So number 1, what's the difference between weathering and erosion? Number 2, what percentage does water expand by when it freezes and turns to ice? 3, what are the 2 names given to that process in question 2? Okay, number 4, how are the erosional processes of plucking and abrasion different? So what's different about them? Number 5, what type of effect does abrasion have on bedrock beneath the glacier? What does it do to it? Number 6, to take place, abrasion relies on rocks embedded in the glacier. But what shape are these rocks? Number 7, on a scree slope, are the larger or smaller boulders found at the bottom of the scree slope, and why? So you'll need to have a little think about that. I've not necessarily included it in the answer there, but you can have a think about a scree slope and what you think. And number 8, how do plucking and freeze-thaw weathering allow abrasion to take place? So why do both of those processes allow abrasion to take place? Okay, documentary recap. I suggest at some point, we may well even do this in class, you've watched a bit of this documentary or some segments from the first lesson, and there's some good bits in it, and I may well play it to you as a whole class if you've not all decided to go watch it away yourself. I have put it there if you want to go away and watch it. It's about an hour long. And it covers ice on our planet as a whole, and it's quite a good link up. And the clips you've already watched really underline those important processes in glaciation, how they form, and how they're important to our planet. So it's quite a good documentary. So I've just left that link for you to have a little look at that as well. If you've got any questions, please, as always, post them on the Google Classroom or send me an email, and I'll be happy to have a Google Meet with you or a discussion about anything that you're not sure of. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing your work from this lesson when it's due. Well done.